Ever wonder what's really going on behind that? Way up high in government, it's almost never as often there are really So today we're doing dive exact kind. We've got a pretty fast stack from military and government. And these sources, they paint a remarkable insight about how to, especially around this idea of decision.
Right. And our mission today really is to unpack all that. Different viewpoints, the tricky strategic things they're weighing up, and the very real dilemmas these decision makers are faced. So you'll hear not just what they're talking about, but maybe more importantly, why these debates are so critical. Hopefully you'll get a better handle on the nuances, the sheer weight of the situation.
Okay, let's dive in. Our sources immediately throw up this major question. Why is there such, strong disagreement, even inside Israel's leadership, about going ahead with what some people are calling the conquest or taking control of Gaza? Some folks in these talks apparently see that as a, quote, great disaster. Why such extreme language? What's behind that, Tier?
Well, what's really striking is how the sources keep saying the decisions the cabinet is facing are not easy at all, just not easy. So even if the big goal seems clear to them, there's just no consensus on the method. How do you actually do it? That seems to be the real point of friction.
Okay, so if a full conquest is off the table for some, or at least seen as potentially disastrous, what other strategies are they actually talking about? Are there, more viable options being debated?
Yeah, the insights we have point to a few alternatives. One option they discuss is deploying 4 or 5 brigades for a full takeover.
4 or 5 brigades, that's a lot of troops, right? Tens of thousands.
Oh yeah, a very significant force. But then there's another idea, maybe more focused, targeting a center of gravity like Gaza City.
A center of gravity, that's military speak for.
Basically, the core source of the enemy's strength or ability to operate. The idea is if you control that, you might cripple their efforts without needing to occupy every single street. And our sources suggest it's not even a done deal that the cabinet will decide on an immediate full takeover. So these alternatives are definitely being seriously considered.
Now, here's something that sounds really one of the heaviest things mentioned, question of taking legal responsibility for the Gaza Strip. What does that actually mean on the ground? And why is it such a big...
That's a critical point.
Yeah.
Really high stakes. The sources call it a very heavyweight topic. See why? It's got upsides and downsides, apparently. One idea floated to kind of manage this is moving the population in Gaza southward. Then they could still focus on taking Gaza City, but maybe avoid that immediate full responsibility for everyone everywhere.
But moving potentially hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, that immediately brings up huge humanitarian question and the logistics.
Wow, exactly. And the humanitarian side does come up explicitly in the sources, especially around aid.
Okay, so what's the specific challenge there with aid, and how are they thinking about tackling it?
Well, the main goal for Israel, as it's discussed, is stopping Hamas from getting its hands on the humanitarian aid. So the solution being talked about involves needing more positions for an American contractor company to open up in the area.
An American contractor. Interesting.
Yeah, the idea seems to be to let residents get food directly, sort of bypassing any potential Hamas interference. It sounds like a real logistical and, frankly, political tightrope walk.
And beyond the military stuff and the aid, our sources are really clear that you can't make any plan without dealing with the hostages. That's obviously huge. How does that fit into this strategic thing?
It's central. The sources stress that any integrated plan must address how to track and release the captives. It has to be part of it. The thinking seems to be that, creative operational plans putting pressure on specific areas like Gaza City might just push Hamas towards negotiation. But the stark reality they acknowledge is if that pressure doesn't work, well, then the operation would just continue until Hamas is overthrown. It really highlights that tough balance, doesn't it, between trying for immediate rescue and the longer-term strategic aim.
Okay, so to really get our heads around these strategic choices, we need to understand the internal dynamic, between the political leaders and the military chief. Now, our sources mention something interesting here described as good news. Apparently, there's no fight between the politicians and the military on the basic need to win the war and overthrow Hamas. So, if everyone agrees on the ultimate goal, what is the disagreement about then? Where's the friction?
Right, if you connect the dots, the argument isn't if Hamas should go, it's the way or the path to make that happen. For the politicians, maybe it's more about the big picture, the headlines, the strategic declaration.
The what?
Yeah, but for the military, it's about turning that into actual implementable plan, with real timelines, manpower, and legal implications, all the nitty-gritty.
So the classic tension between the grand strategy and the messy tactical reality.
Exactly. It's the vision versus the blueprint.
And sources mention the military doing detailed staff works plan. But I wonder, are there still points where this careful military planning clashes with the politics for those headlines? Or maybe where the implementable plans reveal unexpected problems?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the process. The military's detailed staff work, as they call it, means looking at the implications of every single idea, building this really comprehensive picture. And that includes international legal aspect, the possible economic impact if things drag on, and this is key, the strength and resilience of our forces. Their own force. What's really insightful from the sources is how that focus seems to have shifted. It's not just about the enemy anymore, who they see as relatively weakened.
Right.
Instead, the big strategic worry now is the sustainability of their own forces. Can they keep this up? They're looking at everything from international law right down to the economic strain of calling up reserves for long periods. It's like a pivot where their own capacity becomes the main limiting factor.
That is a powerful shift, a really unexpected focus. So given that, what's singled out as the biggest worry about their own forces' strength and sustainability?
A huge one they highlight is the length of the reserve duty, the sheer time commit. There's talk of the potential for another 400 days of reserve duty for every reserve.
Wow. Another 400 days.
Yeah. And that's not just a number. It hits the economy hard, and it tests the resilience of the reserve system itself. People have jobs, families. These are framed as very serious considerations.
Yeah.
They need a long-term perspective, something that goes way beyond just winning the next battle.
So when you put all these complex pieces together, and the legal side, the economy, the troops, the hostages, international pressure,
right,
what does it actually mean for making the final decision? Is there any simple?
Well, the sources really hammer this home. It's not so simple. You can't just say, conquer this, do that. It doesn't work like that. Ultimately, it seems to fall on the prime minister to find what one source calls the right and most professional golden path, a path that has to account for many, many components. And that's why they call it a moment of truth, because you've got this incredibly complex area with hostages and 2 million civilians, leftover Hamas fighters, all the international eyes on them, and the crucial question of their own troops' strength and endurance. What's needed, the sources stress, is serious plan, not just slogans, but real optimal solutions based on all these factors.
Okay, let's shift to some of the immediate political stuff. Our sources talk about early rumors that some government ministers might actually vote against a deceit. What happened? Were they true?
Yeah, that was floating around. Amidst those rumors, one source, speaking for Forum Hagavura, that's an advocacy group focused on military stuff, said they actually reached out directly. They contacted 8 government ministers who were supposedly going to oppose the vote on the decision and taking over the Strip. And according to this source, every single one of them denied it was true. They all said, no, they would vote for the decision.
All 8 denied it.
That's the report. And apparently a senior minister, Israel Katz, even confirmed it directly to the source, saying, quote, we are heading for a decision. So it suggests maybe more unity at the top than some reports suggested.
Okay, that sounds pretty clear from the government side then. But our sources also bring up warnings from the chief of staff, the top military guy. One source says he repeatedly warns that this kind of move could actually harm the hostage. How does that military caution square with the political determination?
That's a really important question, isn't it? It gets to the heart of the civil-military relation. You've got the government apparently lining up behind the decision, but the chief of staff voicing these serious concerns about the hostages. Now, one source pushes back a bit, arguing that, look, no operation to free hostages is ever totally risk-free. There's always danger to the hostages and danger to the rescuers, too. The view presented there is basically, unless you keep applying pressure and make Hamas negotiate, you might have to attempt a rescue to make any progress at all. It's presented as this incredibly difficult ethical and strategic calculation.
And Hamas's position on negotiating, what do the sources say about that? Are they budging at all?
Critically, the sources paint a picture of Hamas having no interest in returning all the hostages, just no interest. They say Hamas has rejected every offer put on the table, whether from the Americans or the Israelis, and their absolute bottom line, their most important condition for any deal is reportedly the end of the war and the withdrawal of all IDF forces from the Gaza Strip.
Which would essentially leave Hamas in power.
Exactly. The concern expressed in the sources is that this leaves Hamas intact and makes the southern border very dangerous. From the perspective we're seeing in these sources, that's just unacceptable because a core war aim is to remove the enemy from the south and, well, overthrow Hamas.
So you've got these different forces pulling, the government's push for decision, the chief of staff's warnings, Hamas digging in its heels. How are they managing these gaps, especially between the government and the military?
Well, there's mention of member of Knesset Ari Adieri. He sits in on cabinet meetings as an observer, and he's reportedly trying to bridge the gap, maybe suggesting a more gradual approach, perhaps. But even with these reported difficulties or concerns coming from the Army side, particularly the Chief of Staff, the sources are quite clear. There's no disconnect between the Chief of Staff and the Prime Minister. They're still talking, still working together.
So the debate is happening, but the relationship isn't broken.
That seems to be the message, that this kind of substantive debate between the military and the government is actually seen as positive. It's healthy. it leads to better planning. But at the end of the day, the sources emphasize, once the government makes a decision, the army must align with government instructions. That's just how it works. They call it the rules of the game in Israel. And the sources also push back against public calls for the chief of staff to resign over this, stressing that what's needed is unity and strength once a decision is made. Execute them.
And one last piece here, protests, seen reports of demonstrations. How do those fit into this whole complex picture?
Yeah, the sources confirm that. They talk about a significant rise in protest wave. Demonstrations in Tel Aviv, hundreds protesting near the Kiryat, that's the military headquarters. And these protesters, their argument is essentially that any action whatsoever will harm the hostage. It shows this strong public feeling prioritizing the hostages' immediate safety, maybe above some of the other strategic aims being discussed.
Okay, so after all, what does this really mean for you listening to this, trying to make sense of an incredibly complex situation? We've seen that, the big goal, win the war, overthrow Hamas, seems agreed upon. But the way to actually do that, wow, it's amazing. Legal issues, economic burdens, military capacity, humanitarian crisis. It's a huge strategic challenge.
Right. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, it just hammers home that these major strategic decisions, they're almost never simple top-down command. They come out of these intense internal arguments, weighing huge risks to civilians, risks to soldiers, risks to the country's own resilience, all while trying to navigate international law and deal with an enemy who won't budge. Maybe the aha moment here is realizing the process of making the decision is just as complex, just as critical as the decision itself.
Yeah, this deep dive really showed us that even when the objective seems clear, the path is just littered with these incredibly difficult choices and trade-offs. It makes the final decision a genuine moment of truth for the leadership. It's not just figuring out what to do, but how to do it in a way that's sustainable, effective, and somehow aligns with all these competing pressures.
Which leaves us with a question for you to think about, maybe. In situations like this, with such high stakes, so many competing priorities, military victory versus humanitarian needs, legal constraints, economic realities, how do you think a nation can best navigate that kind of moment of truth? It's a puzzle, isn't it? No easy answers, and definitely one that's still unfolding.